Chapter 7. Ripley opened her door and found Fulk standing there, his face solemn. He had one hand raised to knock, and dropped it. The big man looked as if he had slept badly. He smelled of stale alcohol and sour sweat. "Fulk," she said. "What a treat. I was just on my way to breakfast." She saw that the sarcasm in her voice didn't escape him. He reddened slightly. "Yeah, well, I wanted to talk to you for a minute. About the trip. I want to go." Ripley stepped back, surprised. Fulk obviously took it as an invitation. He walked over to the desk and leaned against it. He kept his gaze on the floor. She looked him up and down. He had been sitting when she had met him the other day, and she hadn't realized how huge the man was. At least 195 centimeters and 100 kilos, barrel-chested and long-legged. His receding hair was worn long in a blonde ponytail, and his moustache was slightly darker. Embarrassment didn't rest well on his hard face, and he looked as if he were in an unfamiliar emotion. One corner of his mouth twitched, and his heavy brows were drawn together. "We aren't offering any money," she said finally. His expression didn't change. "Yeah, that's fine. You need help, don't you? I'm sorry I was such an asshole. I want to go." Ripley frowned. This wasn't the man she had met yesterday, the loud, wisecracking up-yours pirate. He had admitted to having the dreams easily enough, but treated them lightly. He said his woman had insisted on the site visits, and he had called them a waste of time. "Why?" she said. Fulk sighed and looked up, but not at Ripley. "The military channel," he said, focusing his attention on the ceiling. "You heard about their little fuck-up yesterday?" "I saw it." "I was in the middle of a card game at a bar when it played. I almost had to beat the shit out of the tender to turn it up." He seemed out of breath and paused for a few seconds. Ripley waited. "Marla was one of those soldiers," he said. "She told me she'd be gone a while, said it was a standard drill shit. She told me not to worry." Fulk finally looked at Ripley. She saw that his eyes were bloodshot and rimmed in red. "Last night, some asshole dressed in a captain's uniform told me that there had been an unfortunate accident on her ship, and that it would be a good idea for me to keep quiet about it. The bastard stood there and lied to me. I heard her name on that cast. I heard somebody yelling it." Fulk stopped and took a shuddery breath. All of Ripley's earlier dislike for the man evaporated. He was obviously in great pain. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wish there was something I could do." "I want to go," said Fulk. "I want to kill them." He didn't sound angry or desperate. His voice was calm and matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. "I loved her." "We're meeting at 0800 tomorrow, in the dojo on C," she said. He straightened up at that and nodded, his expression unreadable. Ripley understood what it was like to lose someone close, and knew there was nothing she could do to make it easier for him. "Thanks," he said, walking to the door. "I'll be there." She had no doubts about that. Wilks watched General Peters scan the printout sheet of the site files Leslie had pulled. To avoid problems with confidentiality and computer rascaling, she had only included the names of the dreamers they had spoken to, along with statements from Billie and Ripley. 12 in all. 10 of them had agreed to go. And you say this dream is the same in all of these cases, Sergeant? The General spoke without looking up. Yes, sir. Wilks stood in his office at ease, hands behind his back. It was one of the more palatial rooms on Gateway, well lit and comfortably warm. Pastel paintings were hung on the walls, and the stuffed chairs were high-quality synthetic leather. Peters had not asked him to sit. The General had not gotten as far as he had through imaginative thinking. His stoic expression and hard eyes said as much. Standard military, right down the line. The man was also quite fat, hadn't seen much hands-on combat lately. Wilks had served under such men before, assholes too closed-minded and by the numbers to believe in anything outside their own experience. He was wasting his fucking time here, but Ripley wanted to give it a shot. Fine. Well, this is very interesting, Peters said, looking up. But I'm afraid there's really no way I can authorize such a trip on just this. We'll have to look into it further. His tone was dismissive. Wilks said, "Is there anybody else I can speak to about this, sir?" "Excuse me?" Wilks shrugged. He was still a Marine, sort of. They hadn't been able to pull all his records, so his status was pretty much in limbo until they did. That gave him a little leeway when talking to officers. He said, "Well, sir, there are civilians in the governing board. They might be interested in this." Peters looked at Wilks with his piggy eyes. "Are you trying to be smart, Sergeant?" "No, sir." Not with this clown. Say something smart, and it would sail right past. "Yes, there are civilians in power here, but when it comes to military missions using my hardware, I am God." Wilks said nothing, waiting. "I've read your record, Sergeant, and you've got a long history of being a troublemaker. I don't need any more trouble than I've got." Peters set the proposal aside and motioned towards the door. Wilks could see that there was no chance. If he thought kissing ass here would work, well, fuck, he'd done worse. But he knew it was a waste of time. Had known it all along. But at least he'd held his temper in check. There was a time when he'd have popped Fatso right here in the mouth and smiled as he waited for the MPs to come get him. "Thank you for your time, sir." The General grunted, but didn't look up from his desk, where he was already looking through other papers. The temptation to slam the door on the way out was one that Wilks was only barely able to resist. Billie met Wilks at the Four Sails. He sat at his table waiting and stirring his drink, his scarred face tense. Ripley calmed, said she'd be a few minutes late, said Billie, and sat down. "How'd it go with the General?" "About like I expected. Head was jammed too far up his ass for him to begin to hear me." He sipped at his drink. "Fucking officers." Billie felt her stomach clutch at itself. This had become important to her. How could she get to Amy? How could she still hope that the child would still be alive? "What's the matter with you two?" Ripley said. She slid into the booth and sat across from them. "Are we ready for our meeting tomorrow?" Wilks said, "Yeah, if we can fly without a ship. The General thinks we're crazy. No surprise." Billie's heart felt heavy. "It looks like the game is over," she said, "unless you want to steal a ship." Ripley grinned. "I thought you'd never ask," she said. Wilks returned the grin. "I knew it. I fucking knew it." "You didn't really think some fat old general was going to give us a ship, did you? That was a long shot, at best." Wilks nodded. "Gonna make us criminals again." Well, sure, it would have been nice, but we don't always get what we want, do we? Time to go to Plan B, Ripley said. Which was really Plan A all along. We swipe what we need. Makes sense to me, Wilks said. He raised his glass in salute. Here's to crime. Billie smiled and nodded. Well, it wasn't as if they hadn't done it before. Christ, they were getting to be old hands at stealing ships. The one from Earth to Spears' military base, the one from there to here, the escape pod. It did make sense. What the hell? What the hell?